This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
This is International Hour. We're going to talk in this hour about Donald Trump and the European Union, two groups that absolutely loathe each other, and the beginnings, the prospects perhaps of some kind of trade war. We're going to talk about Mrs. Merkel, Germany, the fact that it's taken months and months and months to actually form a government, and we're going to talk about the Italian general election, which is taking place today. Is Euroscepticism now sweeping through Europe? I'll tell you what, it's certainly swept into the White House. I think Trump's administration are more Eurosceptic than I am, which perhaps explains what's been going on. But Italy, Italian politics. Now, I have, over these years, in the European Parliament, I've had the Northern League, who have now rebranded to the League, now a major force in Italian politics. I've had them in my group, and in 2014 I formed a new group in the European Parliament in a negotiation that took place between Beppe Grillo, and if you haven't heard of Beppe Grillo, he was Italy's best known, best paid stand-up comedian. And he formed a new party, the Five Star Party, a completely different concept in politics. The whole party is run and organised online. They select their candidates online. They choose their policies online. And I've sat with the Five Star movement ever since 2014. So a lot of these players in the Italian elections I know. I even know Silvio Berlusconi, because when I was first an MEP, he, believe it or not, did a stint there as an MEP. Italian politics is complicated. Italian politics is entertaining. Italian politics is full of arguments, the likes of which you've simply never, ever seen. I never forget, in 2009, when I was working with the Northern League, and two of their deputies came to see me in my office to talk about how we were going to form this new alliance in the European Parliament. And within about 30 seconds of the meeting beginning, they started screaming at each other, came very close to blows, left, went into the corridor, screamed some more, and the meeting was cancelled. And I thought, gosh, this is all rather bizarre. And one of their advisors said to me later, no, Nigel, it's fine. This is kind of how we do things in Italian politics. But let's try and get a big idea of who the players are in this election today. It is complicated, but earlier on I spoke to Dr. Filia Ullum, and she's senior lecturer in politics and Italian from the University of Bath. And I wanted her to explain to us what these elections are about and what they mean. And I started by asking her, who are the main parties involved today?
So rather than main parties, there are really three kind of main coalitions. There's a centre-left coalition, which is led by Matteo Renzi, the former Prime Minister. Then there is a centre-right coalition, which is made up of various parties led by Silvio Berlusconi. And then there is a centre, well, I'm not sure we can call it a centre, but there is another group, so there's a three-way split, and the other group is led predominantly and is led by the Five Star movement.
Now, the Five Star movement have sort of come from nowhere. They've been led by this very charismatic comedian. But who's actually running Five Star these days?
So basically, the comedian Beppe Grillo can't actually stand for a public office himself. So it's being run and being led, or the challenge or the election is being led by a young man called Luigi Di Maio, who is a 31-year-old who's come from nowhere and who's got involved in politics over the last couple of years. So he's seen as a fresh, new face.
And the opinion polls, the last ones I saw at least, suggesting that Five Star will become the biggest party in Italian politics.
So one of the things we need to take into account is that in Italy, by law, polls are not allowed to be released 2 weeks before the actual election. So there are these 2 weeks where we don't really know what is going on. So you're absolutely right. The last polls seem to indicate that the Five Star movement will be the largest single party. But that will not automatically mean that they will then go on to form the government, because of this very complicated electoral system. And I think that's what we need to think about, is the complex nature of the new electoral system that was introduced in 2017, if I remember, which is extremely complicated, which means that even if the Five Star movement is victorious this evening, is the largest single party, that does not mean that they're going to government, and that's when we will then have this post-election negotiation and engineering where our comeback kid, Silvio Berlusconi, might be able to have more power and might be able to organise what's going to happen next. He can't actually stand himself because he's banned and barred from public office, but he might have a role to play in what happens next.
No wonder people are confused. And yes, and I know that Antonio Tajani, the President of the European Parliament, has volunteered himself to become Prime Minister if that Berlusconi coalition wins. Interestingly, the Five Star Movement, and of course I know Beppe Grillo, I've worked with his people in the European Parliament, but Grillo's always said to me that he hardly has a voter over the age of 40, that it's a very, very young phenomenon in terms of their support. And yet, what do you think? I mean, is it immigration and the euro? Are they the main issues in this election, or are people voting on corruption too?
Well, one of the things we haven't mentioned, potentially, is the 30% of people who might not vote.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a big kind of vote where there are a lot of people who might find that the electoral system might confuse their vote and might produce a government that they're not actually involved in or interested in. I'm not sure necessarily that the big issues have been spoken about correctly and intelligently. I think there's a lot of personality politics that has taken place and taken hold in Italy. So I'm not really sure that there have been that many clear manifestos to a certain degree. It has very much focused on the personalities. What you haven't mentioned is that Matteo Salvini has proposed himself as potentially a prime ministerial candidate if he and the Northern League make a massive breakthrough and beat Forza Italia in terms of a vote in terms of the single party. So that will be interesting to see. I think that the situation is going to be one of long protracted negotiations. It's not going to be very, very clear. I'm not sure that necessarily Europe has anything to worry about. I think that what happens in Italian politics is very much its own dynamics, its own history, and therefore I think that there are a lot of issues, but unfortunately there haven't been really any kind of deep discussions and deep analysis of the situation in Italy. So people are voting not necessarily for a party, perhaps against a party, and the situation is extremely confused.
Yeah, I must admit, I thought a few months ago that a lot of the parties were making very Eurosceptic noises. And I've noticed as the election's gone on, we've seen rather less of that. So I guess you're right. Personalities dominating in many, many ways. And tell us, I mean, to people in this country, Silvio Berlusconi, and we might laugh or be appalled at the Bunga Bunga parties, but as you say, he's barred from public office because
although he's challenging that, he's actually challenging that. Yes,
he is challenging it. But I mean, does this man still have credibility in Italy?
I'm not sure that necessarily he has credibility. I think the situation is extremely confused. I think that the left haven't necessarily done as much as they could have, and I think that the electorate is tired and is not sure where change is going to come from. So populism has taken hold, and he's charismatic, so that obviously helps and attracts certain voters. And again, I'll come back to the fact that we have this kind of poll. We don't know what's actually happened in the last 2 weeks, and we're not really clear, whether the apathy is going to take hold. What is going to be clear is that afterwards, if there isn't a majority, what happens in Italy, whether they go back to the election and they vote again. That is one thing that we need to realise, or who becomes Prime Minister. It seems to me that the real kind of interesting things will only happen after the election. The campaign has been one full of insults to a certain degree, has been one of simplifying important questions like immigration, like even the mafia, for example, that hasn't really been dealt with. And so I think it hasn't been a very interesting or good campaign. But what will be interesting from our perspective will be to see what happens afterwards, and who manages to hold together a government, if at all possible.
Well, that's a sort of quick run through Italian politics. It's complex. And of course, if you have a system of proportional representation, you will always have more parties vying for position because, the thresholds to get seats are fairly achievable. I want to ask you, do you sense that Euroscepticism is sweeping across Europe? I think it certainly is. And is the idea of coalition politics perhaps the way forward? Would you like to see another coalition here in this country? To get involved in this, call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And apart from watching us on Facebook, you can comment there too. What is for certain is that the Five Star Movement a populist movement of young people, and bear this in mind, folks, of the under 40s, the Italians are the most disenchanted with the euro as their currency and with the European project because of what they see with mass migration coming to Italy's shores. So it's almost the other side of the coin from this country, where the majority of young people in this country voted Remain. A majority, it would appear, of youngsters in Italy, if they were given the chance, might go the other way. But the parties... I mean, Berlusconi clearly has a grudge against the European Union. He was effectively removed in a coup d'etat as Prime Minister and replaced by Mario Monti. An unelected Prime Minister was plonked into Italy, former Goldman Sachs director. I'm sure that's just a complete coincidence. So Berlusconi has got quite a Eurosceptic grudge against the project. Salvini, Matteo Salvini, who leads the Lega. Now, they were called the Northern League for years because they wanted the north of Italy to separate away from the south. They're now called the Lega, and they're trying to get votes in the south as well. And Salvini, on the record in the past, saying he wants Italy to leave the European Union. But Europe itself, and we kind of got this, didn't we, really, out of that interview with Filia Alum, Europe itself has diminished, I think, over the last few weeks as a campaign issue, but Euroscepticism had propped up, I think, the League, Berlusconi, and indeed the Five Star. And how interesting that once again it is the centre-left, Renzi, the former Prime Minister, the man who had to resign at the end of 2016 when he lost a referendum on constitutional change and reform. But it is the traditional socialist parties that are being squeezed in nearly all of these scenarios. Very much the same thing happening in Germany, where now the SPD are now third in the polls, with the AfD up above them. So I'm going to go to Richard in Sidcup. And by the way, I'm particularly keen to hear from any Italian listeners, how you see this election going today, how you see Italian politics as a whole. Because even though we may not get a decisive result today in Italy, there is a shift towards what people call populism. I don't call it populism. I think that term was designed as an insult. But it is a different kind of politics. And there'll be a massive shift in Italy in that direction today. Of that, I'm absolutely sure. Let's go to Richard in Sidcup. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Nigel. I just wanted to put it to you. It seems to me it's not just Italy at the moment. There just seems to be the traditional divide of socialist versus capitalist politics has now been replaced by patriotic people versus people that are people in politics that are very pro immigration. It just seems, obviously this is happening and is spiking in Italy at the moment, but it's not just Italy. It seems that every country that's been subjected to EU immigration laws are now appearing to rebel against it. But
yes.
My second point being is that we've got a party in this country, the Labour Party, which are obviously pro-immigration. They've made no secret of it. If they got into power, it would be just unrelented immigration. But you only need somebody like Theresa May, that basically she's only got to sort of utter a few pretences about controlled immigration. We know full well when she was Home Secretary, immigration only ever went up, despite
oh yes,
that was made by her and David Cameron. So I don't know. Is there room here for further betrayal? I mean, even if we get everything we want from our Brexit negotiations, I still wouldn't trust Theresa May with immigration.
Well, Richard, they've shown no intention of doing, frankly, anything about immigration. And part of Barnier's paper that was put out the other day said that anyone that comes during the implementation/transition period will have full rights. And Mrs May did not counter that in her speech at all. This Conservative government have no intention whatsoever to do anything significant about immigration, and that will be seen, Richard, at some point in time as a further betrayal. Richard, and thank you for the call. Richard's basic point is that European politics is now splitting. Immigration is indeed the divisive issue, and either you are for nation state and you believe in controlling immigration very strongly, or you believe in bigger supranational structures. And I guess, to quote Mr Corbyn the other day, that we're all world citizens. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC. It is now 11:18. Well, some quite dramatic news from Italy today, not just the general election, but the Fiorentina captain, Davide Astori, has died aged 81. The top side confirmed the death of their central defender in a short statement on their official website. It said, "We're deeply upset to report that Captain David Astori has died of a sudden illness." for the terrible and delicate situation, and above all for the respect of his family, sensitivity is called for. So 31 years old, senior, big national player in Italy, been found dead overnight. And in this country, Sir Roger Bannister, if you remember, was the first man to break the 4-minute mile, and he's died overnight, aged 88, in Oxford, his family have announced this morning. I called for Italians living in this country or Italy to help join the debate, and I have been helped. Roberto, a first-time caller to the show from Reigate in Surrey, is on the line. Good morning, Roberto.
Ciao, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. How do you... So, Roberto, massive change in Italian politics. How do you see it?
Listen, I'm supporting the five-star movement, and the analysis is not very correct. The five-star movement is not a party. It's something against the establishment.
It's a movement, yeah.
Yes, it's a movement. It's not a party. We have got the worst politician in West Europe, and you know that because you were in Europe. We are fed up about this kind of people, okay? I'll give you an example. If you got a bucket of apple and it's full of worm, if you put a new apple, it will be eaten. The system itself is so corrupted that even a nice person, he cannot do anything. We need something completely different. It cannot be that a barber, barber, the one that cut the hair, inside the government is taking £12,000 a month net. He cannot keep going in this way. We cannot keep going that the head of Lombardia region or county, you say in England, is taking more than Donald Trump. Something has to change, and it must be very strong. And
well, Roberto,
the movement is the only one.
Roberto, yes, they are the five-star movement. They are, of course, a registered political party, but they are in the feel of it, and in every way a movement set up by Beppe Grillo and an internet genius called Gian Roberto Casaleggio. And I went to his office in Milano and met him some years ago. He's passed on now since, and his son David runs it. You're quite right. The five-star movement did start as an anti-corruption movement, but of course now they've got MEPs and MPs and mayorships in places like Rome. Some of the accusations, Roberto, that they've made against the established politicians are now beginning to be made about some of five-star members themselves.
Nigel, listen, when you got a movement that is 8-9 million people, it cannot be all perfect, okay? Yeah. But you have got a perspective of an English guy with a decent policy, okay? Brexit, you think A, I think B, there is a discussion. We don't have any more left, right, or center. We have got a group of people that they want to steal, they want to work 3 years and having a pension for 25 years. It's a nightmare. Something completely new must happen.
Well, no. I mean, and Roberto, that's why they're probably going to come out as the biggest party today. And who knows if the Northern League, or now the League, given that they're trying to get votes in the South, if they exceed expectations, it may be possible that the Five Star and the Lega together could form a coalition. That is certainly not impossible. But Roberto, let me just ask you one last thing. I completely understand why the Five Star movement came into being, with the problems of Italian politics and corruption and all the rest of it. How, as a supporter of the Five Star, are you one of those supporters pushing them for Italy to have a referendum on whether to stay in the euro?
Well, this is a big... I know that is something that you are very passionate.
No, forget me, because I meet their MEPs on a regular basis, and some of them are very, very Eurosceptic, others less so.
Yeah. No, me. Actually, I'm pro United States of Europe. That you don't like, but I feel sorry that England is out. I don't have any any. It's not that I'm angry, nothing. But I think that a big bloc, if it could be managed properly, it can be good for us in a long term.
Roberto, I would say to you, Roberto, there's more chance of Italy being well governed than there is the United States of Europe working. Roberto, I thank you, and that was, in many ways, a very authentic voice of why the Five Star Movement got going in the first place. Absolute dislike and distrust of all things in Italian politics, and every one of the candidates that stands for that party will not have been in party politics of any kind before. It is an attempt at fresh start politics, and today they may well come top in the country. The biggest problem in Italy is squabbling politicians, or politicians that don't have Italy at their heart, I get. Italy, Germany, the UK, Holland show how much resentment out there is towards the EU. Yes, not in the case of Roberto, but many, many, many people who are voting Five Star, particularly the younger ones, think the euro has been a catastrophe for their country. And Bridget says, Nigel, listening to you from the beach in Fuerteventura, with a lot of very, very jealous people there, Bridget. I'm going to go to Jeffrey in Wolverhampton, a first-time caller to this show. Is Euroscepticism, and as they call it, populism, Jeffrey, sweeping the continent?
Yes, I believe. Good morning, Nigel, by the way.
Good morning.
Yes, I believe that, it is totally. It's different over Europe than what it is in the UK, but I think for different circumstances. They have far more immigration and far more unemployment, and I think that's the deciding thing as to why the young people are getting more Eurosceptic than what they are in the UK.
Yes, I think, Jeffrey, had we joined the euro, as Mr. Blair and others wanted us to do, and the CBI, of course, and all these people who tell us now leaving would be a disaster, Ken Clarke, of course, as well. Had we joined the euro, I suspect the youth in this country would be very Eurosceptic, but mercifully we didn't. But no, I mean, this is... So the real question, Jeffrey, is this. People like Tony Blair think that Brexit and what's happening on the continent is a short-term blip. They believe it's an outburst of anger, and that it will subside, and that normal service will be resumed. My view, Jeffrey, is that 2016 was an historic moment in the West. Brexit and Trump, I think, were just the beginning of an absolute sea change that is going to sweep through our politics. Which of those two do you subscribe to?
Oh, yes, definitely. I don't only think that it's like with Brexit and Trump. I mean, I voted Brexit. I was a big believer in it and still are. I think it's a combination of the new populist vote, which is finally people waking up to it, but it's also what we've seen from politicians over the years. The distrust has slowly built up. That can we believe anything politicians say to us?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Jeffrey. Given those speeches that Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have made in the last couple of weeks, their own personal ratings appear to be plummeting as well. So it's happening everywhere. Jeffrey, I thank you. What does Berlusconi's personal habits have to do with governing the country? When he became Prime Minister, Italy was doing fantastic business with the world. Just like Trump, there was a conspiracy of the left and the communists to topple the guy through any means. Well, trouble is, he can't stand as Prime Minister because of his conviction for fraud. He is appealing against that. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 11:30. Italian general election taking place today, and a new kind of vote, a new kind of party doing very, very well. Meanwhile, finally, at long last, there is a government in Germany. Funny, isn't it? When we had a coalition government back in 2010, it took about 6 days to form the coalition. You'd think to read the British newspapers, we were about to fall off the edge of the world. And yet, Germany, Europe's most powerful country, has taken a very long time to get to this coalition. And to help us through this, I'm joined by Jürgen Kronig, political commentator and former editor of the German weekly paper Die Zeit. Good morning, Jürgen.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, they've managed to form a government.
Already?
Well, how long did it take?
Yeah, month and month and month. Yep. And I am puzzled because, to tell you the truth, I responded to the call from LBC out of tradition and good cooperation. But I don't know if the SPD decision, the SPD members of the Social Democratic Party have to decide.
Well, they have. Well, we're told, news reports tell us they have decided. They voted in favour.
In favour, 60% or something.
Yes,
indeed. And this is ironic because it may be the death warrant of the Social Democratic Party. The party lost the more they went into a coalition government with Merkel. From 2000, just to give you an example, 2005, the last time when Chancellor Gerhard Schröder led the Red-Green coalition from Social Democrats with the Greens, he got 35.6%, lost against Merkel. Next election, they moved to the left. They lost approximately 10%. Now, at the last election, they just got 20%.
Yep.
This is a once proud party. Now, of course, opinion polls say they are down to 15 or 14%, even behind the new Alternative for Germany, AfD. So this decision of the majority might mean the end of the Social Democratic Party as we know it, because the voters will punish this.
Yeah, I mean, Martin Schulz, who, of course, I knew as he was, chairing the European Parliament, and off he went to head the SPD. And
he was not your most favourite.
Well, we had a few exchanges, and some of them you saw in public. There were others in private you didn't see, I can promise you.
Yeah, so I believe you.
We weren't exactly friends. But, I mean, he said, no, we're not going to do a deal, we're not going to form a grand coalition. Then he changed his mind, and then it cost him the leadership. Is it reasonable, Jürgen, to say that the rise of AfD, the rise of Euroscepticism in German politics has completely upset the arithmetic?
Indeed it has, but it is the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, which kept together for a while, and Schröder was the last one who did it, keep together the traditional working class and the sort of public sector, social, teachers, university academics. These two pillars of the basis of the SPD have now gone. The working class voters, the traditional industrial workers, and what's left of this social group, have moved either to the AfD, because they are more Eurosceptic, they are against this political correctness. So, and it remains, and the other, the social sector and teachers and academic and globalists, they are either with the Greens or they don't know where they are, or with the SPD. So this means the end of the traditional social democratic ability to gather a coalition.
No, fascinating. And finally, Jürgen Koenig, tell me, it was a decision on immigration that fatally undermined Mrs. Merkel's authority over the course of the last couple of years.
Indeed, yes, and I am on record of saying to Nick Ferrari on program in August or September 2015 that this opening of the borders by Merkel will most probably mean Brexit, and it helped to Brexit.
It did. I have no doubt, actually, that Mrs. Merkel's decision did impact in the Brexit referendum.
Yes.
But can she, in your opinion, is she able now to regain her authority as leader?
I don't think so. She is a dead woman walking, to use a phrase which was used for Theresa May. Really, I mean, she can't, and I predict that she will be replaced in 2 years' time.
Interesting.
No?
Interesting. Jürgen Koenig, thank you very much for joining us there. That was Jürgen Koenig, political commentator, former editor of the German weekly paper Die Zeit, and he's saying German politics is in a complete mess. Merkel's got no authority and can't survive. The traditional SPD centre-left party is in, he thinks, possibly even terminal meltdown, and the Eurosceptics are on the march. So, the Italians are voting today. 3 very clear coalitions out there, but the one in the middle, the fascinating one, is indeed the Five Star Movement, a very new political party. That's looking like topping the polls. The thing to really watch for is how do the Lega do? Do they get enough votes, a big enough percentage and seats, that they and Five Star could, between them, form a coalition? It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. possible? I asked for Italian callers. I'm getting them. David from Canterbury in Kent, good morning.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. So are you voting today?
So, technically I could, but I couldn't find any party that really convinced me, so I'm not actually voting. Yeah.
David, I've seen pictures of the ballot papers in Italy. I mean, they're so big, you could almost cover a whole wall on the side of a house with them. Surely of all those dozens of parties, there must have been one you could have voted for.
Well, yeah, probably, but, the problem is, you just have three big coalitions, right? So that is the vote that really matters. So the other parties are more like, to put some symbols on the ballot, I would say.
Yeah, and okay, so you're not voting. What would you have wanted to hear from a party to have got you to get out there and vote for them?
So I'm beginning to be quite Eurosceptic, so that's something that I'd like to hear. Or at least to defend a bit more our national interest and to defend our borders for sure. And then concentrate on investments on the labor market and innovation and technology. And that is a mix that I couldn't find in all of the parties. So
on the immigration issue, I mean, Berlusconi's party had been talking about it, and, the Lega have been talking about deporting perhaps 600,000 illegal migrants. I mean, why wouldn't you vote Lega?
So I don't really agree with their program on the treasury. So they want to modify the pension schemes, and they are really not favorable towards young people, I think, and they don't have a plan to actually improve the labor market and to have people going to work. One of the big problems is youth unemployment, and I don't see them as really helping with that. So
okay, well,
that is important to me.
Aside from your vote, there is going to be a fundamental change in Italian politics today. Do you think these arguments about the euro, membership of the European Union and immigration, is today's election the beginning of a Eurosceptic trend, in your opinion?
Well, I guess it depends on the results, of course.
Sure.
The immigration is a central issue on why people are voting one coalition or the other. So I think that's a very big deal. And of course, when we have the results, we will see how much people really cared about that. On the euro, I think at the beginning, there were a lot of movements against the euro, like the 5-Star Movement, the Lega, and even Berlusconi a bit. But now it seems that only Lega is against the euro. So it's a bit weird. And if you see the candidate that Berlusconi is proposing for the government is Antonio Tajani, which is president of
I know him.
Something in Europe. I don't know.
European Parliament,
useless groups, And so, so it's a bit weird because, of course, you have a coalition and you have a person that...
They've slightly backed away, David. They've slightly backed away, apart from the Lega, from their Euroscepticism as this election's approached and as personalities and other things have dominated. David, thank you for your call there from Canterbury, an Italian who couldn't find a party to vote for, but he himself becoming more Eurosceptic. And I suspect there's a lot of people in Italy on that journey. I think so. Anyway, you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 11:46. Euroscepticism is completely reshaping German politics, and it's going to have a bit of a voice today in the Italian elections too. Maybe not quite as strong as I thought it was going to be, but it'll be there today. Of that, there's no doubt. And the other place where Euroscepticism has swept is from an Obama administration. Do you remember that guy? He was the president who came in and said that if we left the European Union, we'd be at the back of the queue, and we didn't like it very much. Well, the new incumbent is a Eurosceptic. He's Donald J. Trump. And on Friday, the European Union was talking about perhaps increasing tariffs on bourbon whiskey, Harley-Davidson motorbikes and jeans. And a furious Donald Trump has responded, on Twitter, of course, by saying if the EU wants to further increase their already massive tariffs and barriers on US companies doing business there. We will simply apply a tax on their cars, which freely pour into the US. They make it impossible for our cars and more to sell there. Big trade imbalance! Exclamation mark. Well, certainly the issue of German cars being sold in America, in the numbers they are, and with such a massive deficit, is something he's talked about many times before. I know one thing he's keen to do is to get German car companies to open plants in the States. Either way, be in no doubt about one thing. The European Union hate the Trump administration, will do anything they can publicly to damage it, and be sure, from the contacts I've got in Washington, that much of that will be reciprocated. Right, back to Euroscepticism in Europe. Nick is a first-time caller from Solihull. Good morning, Nick.
Hello, Nigel. I've been fighting your corner for 20 years.
20 years? You are well, Nick, there weren't many of us about 20 years ago, were there?
Well, I started off with Goldsmith when he started the party off. Anyway, I was interviewed by The Guardian the day after the referendum, and because I got great big massive posters outside my house. And
how big, Nick?
Oh, they were the biggest you could get, 6 foot square. I had 2 of them, plus the flags.
So do the neighbours just all think you're a nutter, basically? Or?
No, actually. I mean, that was one of the questions The Guardian reporter said to me. I said, no, I've had an excellent response. My neighbours are actually much in favour of what you're doing. So I actually said to The Guardian reporter that I promised that there would be a domino effect. I've actually got the paper itself, which they printed, because of the way the EU has basically deserted Italy, Greece, and the countries now have become very, very Eurosceptic because of due to mass migration from North Africa into Europe, which we don't hear from the national press, is like the Mirror and the Guardian, that George Soros is funding open society to the tune of 18 billion. That's because he supports open borders, which effectively means that he wants Europe to become one of federal state, and this is just the sort of the footing of what Mr. Soros wants to do. And I believe you were writing to several ministers in the European Union to ask
I read
their meetings with him.
No, Soros said, Soros's organisation listed 246 MEPs as friends of theirs. So I wrote to them all, asking a series of questions such as, have you had meetings with Soros organisations? Have you taken money from Soros organisations? Have you spoken at conferences from Soros-funded organisations? And guess how many answers I got from them, Nick? Absolutely zippity-doo, but hey, we found the article, by the way. You're Nick Courtney, aren't you?
Yes, I am, yes.
Yeah, we found the Guardian article, and you were drinking champagne, apparently, that morning.
Yes.
Yeah, well, quite right, too. So where does... I mean, is your prediction of a domino effect, doesn't that perhaps explain why Monsieur Barnier is being so tough with us?
Of course, yeah, because they're employing bullying tactics. Basically, they're holding us to ransom. They are absolutely. They do not want to give up these wonderful pensions they've got and these wonderful salaries, first-class travel, etc., because they are threatened by the Brexit vote and also the influence of Mr. Trump, who probably at open war with the European Union the way it's going on.
Oh yeah.
But. I think the younger generation are really turned off now by the bullying of the EU, their tactics, and why Mr. Barnier, an unelected, another one like Tusk and like Juncker, none of them have been elected, Nigel, and I think the younger generation need really to take a bit of a history lesson as to why 17.4 million people voted to get out.
Yeah, and so, Nick, your feeling is that this Eurosceptic wave is going to continue across Europe?
I absolutely do, 100%.
Yeah, super. Nick, thank you for calling. Great to take Nick's call there, and I'm seeing this Guardian article the day after the referendum when they sought him out because his house was festooned in Leave posters, and there he was drinking his French champagne. Quite right, too. Will is calling from Oxford. Good morning, Will.
Hi, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So, what do you think?
So you often make the point that there is this wave of Euroscepticism, particularly among people in my generation, the younger generation.
Across Europe, more than this
Europe.
country, yes.
Yeah, no, across Europe, absolutely true. And I think that's true. But isn't that kind of a reason to stay? Because it actually means that your line that we're on a single path to the United States of Europe might not be so correct, because if younger people around Europe are kind of sceptical of grand visions about integration and are realistic and pragmatic about it, doesn't that mean that our country, Britain, who's been the chief flag bearer for pragmatism in Europe across the last 2 decades, might actually be the one forging the consensus over the next 2 decades?
No, I understand. No, listen, it's a very well-made point. However, Will, to change the European Union is dashed difficult. Do you know, we can't even change the fact that once a month our offices get loaded in trucks, put on lorries and taken 400 kilometres down the motorways of Europe to Strasbourg. And people say, let's reform it. Let's get rid of this terrible waste. It's costing another 300 million euros every year, let alone what our carbon footprint may be. And the answer is that to reform it, you would need a unanimous vote in the Council of Ministers, and the French would never, ever vote for that. So, Will, I'm optimistic that we are seeing this youth wave of Euroscepticism in Italy and elsewhere, but I think our futures together in a new, different kind of Europe, once the European Union has gone, a cooperative Europe, that I think is the future of it, Will. And I think, frankly, to stay in the EU, because we're pleased to see the growth of youth wings voting Eurosceptic, would be taking optimism, Will, in my view, a little too far.
You've been an eternal optimist for 20 years, but I think...
True. True. You got me there.
The important point is that, you have to fight for what you believe in, and you can't just walk away from a table when actually the signs are that we might finally be able to achieve some of the things that this country's been arguing for over decades.
I do not believe the European Union can be reformed, will be reformed, and the lesson they've learnt from Brexit is to integrate even more deeply, which I think is leading to even further alienation. There is big change taking place across Europe. We'll see what these Italian results are today. We'll see what coalition government gets formed. Either way,